The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm feeling a lot better, actually, yeah. I just want to thank everyone for continuing to listen to your pod.
You were getting a bit desperate
We're
there.
glad that you've joined us on this journey. We're thankful every day. We just want to bring you laughter,
Yeah.
sometimes tears, and maybe make you think over your rush hour home coffee when you listen to the pod.
That is a very niche joke. Thank you, Ben Thomas. Also, we have with us today a very special guest as our producer, Tina Tiller.
Good morning.
Kia ora, Tina.
The gang's
It's been
back
a
together.
while. It's been a while.
Finally.
Who would have thought?
We're missing T.I. here, but it's nice to have one of the
He gone
originals.
full time with his ASMR channel now.
Yeah, hope so.
Really boosted it.
But Tina's got a lovely voice too.
She's the J-Lo of New Zealand podcasting.
What are we going to talk about today on Gone by Lunchtime Politics podcast, brought to you by Spin-off members who are the greatest? We're going to talk about Jacinda Ardern being in the USA. Maybe we're going to talk about the Pacific. And I think we should also talk about the Queen. Should we save the Queen, or do you want to pay tribute to the Queen immediately, Annabelle?
No, let's save Kwekwe.
God save the Queen.
Yeah, we'll mark it on the 75th anniversary.
It's just useful for you to know that we have bunting all around the studio. Ben is wearing a full Union Jack blazer, looking very fetching in it too, direct from the gym.
Yeah, I'm currently waving 2 small British flags. I'm stuck midway on a zip line through the spin-off offices. Fireworks are going off, and the sun will never set on the Empire.
And Sunny, Annabelle's dog, is sitting on her lap in a knitted Union Jack sleeve with a tiara.
Yeah, and I'm wearing a fascinator shaped like a toilet seat.
Yes. and Tina is behaving like, which one of it was Kate's baby kid, the little boy who kept on, do you see that?
George?
Covering
No.
the mouth?
Is it Louis?
It's the little one.
Yeah.
It's not easy. It's not
Try
easy
doing that on the
British
mid-eye, Louis, and see how you get on.
Jacinda Ardern last week returned from the United States of America, our true empire. She had 3 big engagements there, the big 3, Stephen Colbert, Joe Biden, and Dr. Harvard.
Where Dr. Ardern was. Her research was recognised.
Yeah. Ben, did it matter? Was it important? What are the rewards?
From a New Zealand point of view, it is important in the sense that, it's become a bit pat now, but circumstances have changed very quickly for us. We'll get onto it later, but things in the Pacific are heating up. This traditional fine line that New Zealand has walked between close trade allegiance to China and strategic and defence allegiance to or alignment with Australia, America, the West, basically. That fine line is becoming narrower and narrower. It's becoming impossible to even tightrope walk, let alone fence sit. The Pacific was the chief chief point of discussion between Ardern and Biden. Getting a meeting at the White House, no small thing for a New Zealand Prime Minister. As we mentioned last time, quote unquote fortuitous circumstances for her. The tragic shooting in Uvalde, Texas, meant that, she was not just recalling, but also playing to sort of the strengths of her prime ministership. She was there in the United States to talk about gun control, and, maybe remind people back at home about, some of the decisive and, universally sort of praised things she's done as leader. Stephen Colbert show, she's an amazing ambassador for New Zealand. She really, she has charm, magnetism, charisma.
And a chili bin full of meat.
Yeah, so she's. I think she's exactly how a lot of New Zealanders, particularly those crucial median voters, love to see New Zealand portrayed on the world stage, in this kind of post Flight of the Conchords sort of self-deprecating, funny, charming sort of thing, and, liberal. We actually can't fault her. She's one of the best representatives of New Zealand overseas that we've ever seen. Back home, I don't know that it had the impact that it might have, a year ago. Back home, the issues are very, very domestic. It's cost of living. You wrote a very good piece on the spin-off about the latest Ipsos poll, which showed that which asked, the Ipsos mood of the nation or snapshot of the nation or whatever, where they asked voters to rank their top, name their top 3 issues. And when you break it down, of those top 3 issues, between the top 6 that were named by anyone in their top 3, 3 or 4 of them are basically just the economy and everything's costing too much, and I don't feel good about my hip pocket. Inflation/cost of living was by far and away the biggest. I think 56% of people noted that was one of their top 3 concerns. Then fuel and gas prices, I think, was third. Or maybe even third, was it? Or second? And that's the exact same thing, right?
Yeah.
So people are really fixated on those hip pocket questions. The other thing that's been happening in her absence is gang warfare seems to have just broken out in South Auckland. We have, I think gang violence tended to sort of fly under the radar when it was just gang v gang. And everyone, including the gang, seemed relatively happy with that, fairly or not. But, thanks to the new tactics of drive-by shootings in suburban neighbourhoods, you're getting, poor builders and flatties having bullets spray through their windows while they're having a nice dinner on their bedroom floor. That's causing, a lot of concern. Government's response, probably what you'd expect, but in the past, their rhetoric on gangs hasn't exactly been tough. And so basically, a real sharp distinction between how her visit went and, her overseas sort of persona, and things back here. Normally we like to see New Zealanders doing well on the world stage. We feel a sense of pride. I think there still would have been some of that, but probably would have seeing the Prime Minister on the cover of a magazine at the gas station after you've just spent $150 filling up your car probably doesn't warm your heart as much as it would have previously.
There was a time, Annabelle, when, as Ben says, all of that overseas coverage would have been more popular. But having said that, her detractors were very keen, and it was quite interesting watching it during the course of that trip to find reasons that she had failed, whether it was unable to get a White House visit, whether it was unable to, secure the spots that they were after, whether it was whether it was ability to open doors for the trade delegation and so on.
Why didn't she guest on SNL?
That sense, SNL, don't even. And then to return, it's a literal returning back to Earth, isn't it? The coming back to New Zealand, just
returning to Middle Earth.
Thank you very much. Podcast Awards, that's nailed down.
That's our promo done. Get it to ZM, get it to NZME, get this on the airwaves.
Is that what it amounts to, Bells?
Well, I think, like Ben says, the domestic issues that we are facing here are not going to turn the tide of what we're seeing in the polls, which is that, Labor's popularity is slipping. But in real terms, her trip to the US was an incredible success, and not just for her own personal brand, but for New Zealand business, for New Zealand tourism, the type of marketing that they got through shows like Colbert and all of that is worth millions and millions and millions of dollars, and we literally could not ask for a better brand ambassador for brand New Zealand than her.
She said on Colbert, from September the whatever it is, direct flights from New York to New Zealand, come and see us, and Colbert in his Middle-earth fashion goes, yes, go and see it, it's the best place in the world. I mean, that's...
Her sales pitch is like so
pretty slack.
on point. It is so slick.
She's a maestro, right? Anyone who wanted to quibble about how she actually performs on these visits overseas, it's either sour grapes or just detachment from reality. She's fantastic at this.
And it kind of shows that the right is actually just as tribal as the left, because if you were thinking strategically, Jacinda Ardern is a far better brand ambassador for New Zealand than what Luxon is. Luxon's got his own amazing skill sets in that, but he's never going to translate as potently as what Ardern is, being a young mum, a woman, this gorgeous, funny, amazing ambassador. So when you think about where we are economically and with what's going on in the Pacific, if we want to have stronger ties with the US, and I'm not saying that we necessarily do, it makes no sense for people to be raining all over the work that she's done, because if we do want to have a bit more economic independence from China, developing that stronger economic relationship with America is going to be key.
Maybe when Christopher Luxon is the Prime Minister, he could appoint her to a role as a sort of business ambassador. Like, he was the head of her business advisory council.
Well, wasn't that in Guyan's interview with Guyan Espina's very long interview?
Was it?
He put to Luxon that when Luxon was considering entering politics, or when he entered politics, he said that most of politics is marketing, and I've been a brand manager in the past. So, but actually, yeah, you're right. Ardern is one of the best at marketing we've ever seen. I don't mean that in a cynical sense. She understands the market segments. She understands what people want, and she just is, what the outside world wants from New Zealand, as a representative.
And all the stars aligned in terms of is it Uvalde? Is that how you say it? Which is like awful, but again, and it goes back to what I said last week, I think it was just as important for Biden to be seen with Ardern as it was for Ardern to be seen with Biden.
Yeah, and I mean, the perhaps unfairness of politics is that none of this has really helped her domestically at all, I don't think.
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, it might have shored up some of the base a bit. I don't know. I mean, I think that, I mean, there wasn't, it was, you have to look pretty hard beyond the almost inevitable fucking up of the aeroplane. I don't see that anything really went wrong with that trip, given they had to navigate a bit of COVID, they had to do with, being able to speak at Harvard to a rapture about misinformation and all of that, to be able to get a meeting as well with Kamala Harris at the White House. Look, we can overstate these things in the way that from New Zealand we do sometimes, but there wasn't much that went wrong. And then, but as you say, Ben, back home, it's not going to shift the dial in any massive sense, and the polling suggests that hasn't happened. Well, let's talk about the polls a little bit. There was a TVNZ poll that came out, I think it was early last week.
A million years ago in podcast years.
Yes. And that it was pretty much stable from the previous TVNZ Kantar poll with National on 39, Labour 35, Green 10, Act 7, and I think again that would have left the Māori Party with the balance of power on 2%, assuming they could get back into Parliament. Then just this week we've had a Roy Morgan poll, and some people are sceptical about the Roy Morgan polls, but although the trend is still pretty compelling.
Its trend has tracked the other polls this year.
Yeah.
And as Matthew Houden likes to point out, he's a Roy Morgan believer, I'm a Roy Morgan doubter.
Oh.
But he says Roy Morgan most accurately predicted the final election result last year. Now, a lot of that's a function of when the polls come out.
Stop clock is right twice a day too. But in any case, it's not, they're not made up numbers. Sometimes the Roy Morgan cynicism can overplay into the idea that
where Roy Morgan really falls down is its analysis,
where they just
because
sort
it's
of
being done from Australia.
From Australia,
they sort of look at the recent headlines, including news stories from
New
after
Zealand,
they did their
New
poll,
Zealand
and then
politics.
They say it's probably
news.
because of this.
And they go the sheep shearing context, Nekada Huna.
Yeah.
It's had a dramatic effect on the and so
it really is just insanely bad analysis, but the numbers are numbers.
And those numbers put National on 40, Labour on 31.5, which is a bit of a gap in terms of blocks. It puts National and ACT together on 50, which is within a whisker, and Labour Greens on 43.
This is the first poll, I think, where we've seen a real gap open up between the right and the left blocks. In I think there was one taxpayer union Curia poll which showed ACT National ahead of the Greens and Labour and the Māori Party combined, but the majority, even though I think it's something like 9 out of the last 11 polls have shown National ahead of Labour, but the majority of those have shown that it's a hung parliament that it all relies on the Māori Party. So this is only about the second poll which shows the centre right being able to form a government, but that's part of a trend. And that will be really worrying people in the beehive.
I think there's some interesting stuff you could potentially read into it. Like, on one hand, you could look at what's happening with ACT and say, well, now that National has a credible leader, their support is dropping. But also, perhaps you could also look at their support dropping and think maybe people don't care as much about co-governance in the treaty as what David Seymour would like to think they do. And that,
if you look at that Ipsos poll, Māori issues and treaty and that sort of thing, I think about 6% of people say that it's in their top 3 issues, and that pretty closely mirrors the ACT vote. So, these are minority issues now. I think, as somebody who's worked in the treaty space for a long time, I actually find that a very encouraging sign that, in the mid-2000s, this was major party stuff that, the Labour Party and National were both trying to show that they were tougher on Māori and stuff. And now it's a minor party concern. Luxon opposes co-governance, Three Waters, Māori Health Authority. Those are inherited positions, but at the same time, he certainly doesn't go down that route of really obvious sort of treaty baiting the way that Seymour has.
And I feel like he's started to retreat more and more from getting caught into conversations around those kind of treaty-based issues.
I don't think they want to talk about it. They just want to talk about cost of living right now. They want to talk about petrol prices. They want to talk about groceries and government spending and kind of let people make the associative link between the three things.
And the other thing too is probably not just because voters care more about that stuff too, but I don't think they want to completely alienate themselves from the Māori Party, given where they're sitting on current polling, and that they might end up being a vital coalition partner for either side. The other thing that's interesting is, when you look at the Green vote and the Māori Party vote, is what is one thing Labour hasn't been very good at is supporting its potential coalition partners the way National did with its very undemocratic support of ACT in the past in Epsom. So will Labour potentially just run party vote campaigns in some of the Māori seats to help bring some more Māori Party MPs in? I doubt it, but in fact, we know that but it wouldn't necessarily be not in their best interest. Yeah. And the same thing too in a seat like Auckland Central where you have Chloe. Would you just run a party vote campaign there and ensure that your mates are there or not?
As an aside, somebody asked about this the other day and I hadn't thought about it, but in terms of Auckland Central, what I think you'll see is kind of like when Katrina Shanks, a little-known National List MP.
Or Hariu.
ran an Ohario, and the party was like, look, take the pedal off the gas. And she was like, I'm going to be the Ohario MP.
Yeah.
I think Helen White it'll be very hard to persuade Helen White not to try and sort of take the crown that she was denied.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think it'll be much harder for her to rally a big volunteer base. The volunteer base in Auckland Central tends to be quite young. I think it will be hard to get them, to pull them into an army to try and depose Chloe Swarbrick. I don't think she'll get a lot of support from the party itself. They'll think that their resources are better used elsewhere. But the complicating factor, I think, for everyone is that, it was a national seat, thanks to Nikki Kaye. It was a Nikki Kaye seat more than a national seat. But if National is resurgent, and if National is resurgent amongst younger voters...
Yeah. Who would they put there?
If they get a strong candidate... And Emma Mello was not a terrible candidate last time. She was given a real hospital
caught up in a few awkward scenes.
God, that's right. Yeah. But she's a hard worker. If she had more time on the ground, and if National's voters swinging back, by a massive amount right now, 25% party vote versus maybe say 40 this time in the coming election, say, that really complicates the picture in there. So,
I think the other interesting thing that the polls show too is that New Zealanders kind of don't care about policy. Like, you've just come through the budget, there's been all of these sort of lollies sprinkled around the place and whatnot. National, besides from saying they'll give rich people tax cuts, have not come up with any compelling policy whatsoever, and yet they're still gaining ground, which again just comes back to that thing of once people are a little bit sick of you, they're a little bit sick of you, and it doesn't matter what you say unless
and probably
you come up with that golden policy.
A huge amount of attention, are they? And I mean, that goes back to that's the reason why we've seen that Labour attack ad, which has probably got a disproportionate amount of attention, but that's because it symbolises something, which is the one where it says Christopher Luxon said he was going to announce these things, and what has he announced in 6 months? Nothing. Terrible, terrible, terrible. And that's an attempt to apply some pressure via the public on Luxon to say things. And Luxon's the strategy from National, and I think probably the pragmatic one at this point, is not to be drawn into the way that so many opposition leaders have over the years been drawn into debates, that they're better off just saying, I'm not interested in going down that path, because there's a dangerous path to go down, because then the story becomes about you. And we've talked about it before, and I'm in danger of overstating this, but the small target strategy that we saw played out in the Australian election recently was precisely to avoid that peril.
And look, we're at a different stage of the cycle to the Australians as well, obviously, since we didn't just have
They're very early in their cycle.
Yeah, that's true. We're midway through. Luxon's been the leader now for about, 6 or 7 months. They've got... a year and probably 15, 16 months to the next election. National has been a basket case in opposition so far, right? And their caucus hasn't applied themselves. There's been a lot of shifting and changing around and demotions and promotions and a lot of sort of Hail Mary passes, as, under previous leaders, particularly Judith Collins, they went after Hipua. They just sort of throw things out, people call it, chasing after every car. Now, there's nothing wrong with chasing after every car if you're actually doing damage to the government. But if all you're doing is throwing out alternative policies which can easily be knocked down or aren't credible or are hard to understand, there's no value in it. The National Party right now, there is there's a huge danger that they will become the next government, sort of in a canter because of, cost of living issues, things like that, or just, beach cricket, it's some time for a turn for someone else. But they will be just as underdone and underprepared as the 2017 Labour caucus was. So what their caucus needs to actually be doing right now is doing the hard yards in policy areas. If you're in health, get along to hospitals, talk to doctors, talk to industry associations, spend time at A&E like Tony Ryle did. If you're in, if you're in commerce, go and talk to, people who are being suppliers to supermarkets. too much of National's policy has been politically dictated, just sort of politicians sitting at whiteboards thinking what might get us a 1% bump in the next poll. They actually, that's first of all, that's obviously not a good way to come up with policy that works and is sustainable for a government. But second of all, if you're just doing everything as a brainstorming exercise, that's not going to have the heft that's needed to withstand attacks from the government. If it's half baked, we've seen over the years, with this fiscal hole stuff, whoever is in government, they will go you. They will say, we've got Treasury costings that disprove what you're saying. This isn't credible. You've got no credibility on this. So both for political and substantive reasons, National shouldn't be releasing policy now. National should start releasing policy next year after they've actually figured out what it is and that it will help in the portfolios. The third reason, which is sort of related to both of those, is that if you come, governments are very good at triangulating. If you come up with a good policy now, the government will just take it and do it. Right? John Key was a master of this, and Ardern's been pretty good as well. If the opposition comes up with a popular policy, the government will just do it. And then they'll say, we've done this popular thing.
Very good points. Excellent advice. People pay top dollar for that. The one thing I just going back to the point on Auckland Central, on support parties, on, and the potential for coattailing and stuff. One of the things that I think is striking right now, notwithstanding, as you both say, that it's a wee while to go, 15 months at least probably, it's actually quite stable. It's actually... ACT went down to, I think, as low as 7 in one of the polls, but they don't look like sinking lower than that. The Greens have been remarkably stable on about 10% all the way through without
They've
having made a
really
huge amount
well,
of noise.
eh?
And part of that is to do, interestingly, in that Ipsos poll that you were mentioning, it's amazing how steady the climate change as one of the top 3 has been basically consistent on, I think it's something like 18% for years and years and years. So it's not like that's surging, although some of the Australian evidence might suggest it is. But anyway, it's not a Teapot Tapes, a Coromandel deal, Epsom. It doesn't feel as though that's almost going to be necessary. Te Pāti Māori is a very interesting part of the equation. Who knows what will happen with Winston Peters? I don't know if you've heard this before, but my thinking is that you never rule him out. So there are those other potential...
Really?
Yep, those other potential forces.
I'm ruling him out now.
Same.
18 months ahead, I'm ruling him out.
Go on.
You've ruled him out. You ruled him out every election since 1981.
Yeah, and last time I was right, and this time I'll be right again.
But it is, and I did a chart because I'm sometimes like to do a chart, and it is interesting when you look at those blocks. If you take out the bad years of COVID, it's basically gone back to where it was before in terms of looking at National ACT as one line and Labour Green as another line. There's a sort of big urn in my chart, and then either side, it's pretty much there. It's pretty much neck and neck, and that seems to me that's where we are now, a year and whatever, 3 months away.
When I look at this and I almost close my eyes, it looks like a crocodile's head just above the water, and then my eyelashes are like the bush in front of it.
Okay. Have you had a lot of flu medication?
No.
Do you have a pulse oximeter? You didn't have COVID, did you?
I didn't have COVID, no.
Okay, we just want to clear that up for...
I just had like daycare sickness.
Freaking out that we're not doing best practice here.
No,
I've always got my mask on. I always mask. I do masked pods. Every single time.
You don't have an N95 though. You need to get a real mask.
You've got a flash mask and it's literally sitting in your hand. So you're not exactly...
That's because I'm a brand ambassador. As opposed to somebody who's going to get COVID.
And on his T-shirt today it says 99.6 natural immunity.
Hey, but you know what? Shout out to the Vicks Formula 44, right?
Yes.
That shit is lit.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spinoff. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
This is Climate Adaptation.
We are the Pōtiki of the Taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama, the Ko Papa Ko Rangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato o Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spinoff Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's talk about the Pacific. We touched on it before. It was the sort of big headline issue that came out of the meeting between Jacinda Ardern and Joe Biden. There was a joint statement that was issued by the two countries, and there were various interpretations about how hard it went. But it named, talked about China's Pacific ambitions. It made particular reference to the Solomon Islands China Security Pact, which Australia particularly, but the West more generally is concerned, presages some military base in the Solomons, which is sort of, not just down the road from Australia in geopolitical terms. China responded to that statement really quite angrily, and there was the foreign spokesperson's briefing went pretty hard, and then through the Global Times, which is the English language state-controlled newspaper, really went as far as issuing not even that veiled threat to New Zealand that it could end up in the place that Australia had found itself. And Australia-China relations have been much more fraught than New Zealand-China relations. And it said, I'm paraphrasing, when Australia crossed China and betrayed China, then it lost China as a trade partner, but America stepped in. New Zealand, if it loses China, don't expect the States to step in, and you could be left with nothing. Now that's paraphrased, but it's pretty much what it said.
It's also completely accurate.
Well, it's definitely the predicament, and there have been for years now, but in a couple of speeches by Grant Robertson, quite clearly the encouragement for diversification away from China, which is sensible in any circumstances, more so now than usually, that you shouldn't rely so much on one export market, and that's our biggest export market. That then created more attention on the Pacific, and you created this situation, Annabelle, where I did an interview with Simon Kofe, who's the foreign minister from Tuvalu. It's on the Spinoff this morning, and he created some waves, got some attention at the climate conference in Glasgow last year when there was a video of him in which it had him in sort of medium and close up, and then the camera at the end zoomed out, and he was standing in the sea, and the rising sea levels around the atoll of Funafuti in Tuvalu. And his point, which is he's not the first person to make it, but this is not a totally new thing, superpowers scraping over the Pacific, and the idea that all we are is some kind of, that the Pacific Islands are some kind of theatre for the ambitions of these superpowers is degrading, was the word he used. And the idea that they had to pick sides is degrading. In terms of the Pacific and its role in the broader geopolitical framework, in terms of New Zealand's interests, in terms of Australia's interests, where Penny Wong, the foreign minister, were there, do you feel as though it sometimes overlooks the kind of sovereignty of nation states?
Well, I think in terms of the sovereignty of our Pacific Island whanaunga, we've completely tuck ahead all over their mana for decades and decades and decades and centuries. And one of the only political assassinations in New Zealand happened in Niue Island, where I think his name was it David Larson, who was the ambassador there and basically imprisoned half of Niue and imposed curfews on them, and then ended up getting murdered by 3 prisoners who they then tried to execute all around the Pacific. Kind of shows the colonial attitudes that New Zealand and Australia has had in the Pacific. So, yes, I think definitely so. I think the other problem that's happened, though, is America, which ironically is completely bordered on one side by the Pacific, has absolutely neglected its role and taken the Pacific for granted. It's been so busy racking around Europe that it's completely and trying to, screw up the Middle East for the last few decades, that it's completely ignored its responsibilities to foster relationships in the Pacific. And I guess it kind of deputised Australia and New Zealand, and they took their eyes off the ball too, and again took a really sort of colonial, patronising approach to our Pacific whanaunga. I mean, New Zealand trade
everyone says that New Zealand's taken its eye off the ball and hasn't respected the Pacific Islands and has let China fill in the breach. But, what's China done? Build some expensive courthouses, give them infrastructure development, build vital ports. We're sending an LGBTQ plus ambassador. Well,
sick burn.
Your move, China.
Well, you know why the true story. The only reason that the Chinese foreign minister went on a 8-day 10-state trip across Pacific Islands trying to do this deal with all of the states.
Send Lewis to do 11.
Didn't do it. But what your argument, Ben, is that would not have been possible. That China would not have been able to fill that vacuum if it hadn't been for the withdrawal of Shane Jones as Pacific ambassador. China saw a vacuum.
That probably hit the GDP from hospitality in the Pacific.
But speaking of Shane Jones, actually, for all of his myriad of faults, one thing that Winston Peters did a really good job of was fostering his relationships in the Pacific, and he was a really popular minister throughout the Pacific Islands and had a really good handle on what was going on. And I remember when Nanaia was first announced as Minister for Local Government and Minister for MFAT, we talked on this pod about how those are kind of mutually exclusive job roles, and that's kind of been camouflaged somewhat by COVID over the last couple of years, but she really needs to get in the waka and working with urgency on those relationships.
And visits the South Island mayors.
The South Island mayor's trip to Tokelau. You're right. Winston Peters did have quite a lot of mana for his work in the Pacific, and when he cropped up on one of the programs recently to criticise and say his argument was that, I think, as you put it, that New Zealand had taken its eye off the ball in terms of its commitment to Pacific neighbours. The Nanaia point is an interesting one. Criticism has come from ACT, from National, from some other quarters, that particularly with the side of Penny Wong going immediately after Labour won in Australia to silence. Where's Nanaia, I think, was the headline on an ACT press release. And is that
she's
fair?
Embroiled,
is that fair?
Well, she's embroiled in three borders, they had a huge
she's
policy.
Been to the Pacific, I mean, there's no argument that she just hasn't, has ignored that whole area. Penny Wong probably, glad to get on her first state outing, the first motorcade. Through up here, probably not.
The Nanaia Mahuta's response is we don't want to overreact.
No, but I think it's not that sort of slightly racist rhetoric about Nanaia's being lazy in the Pacific. It's not that, but, three borders is a huge piece of policy, and I think given that the government knew that they were doing this, it was again not a great idea to give her both of those portfolios, and perhaps she should be handing local government over to someone else so that she can focus solely on MFAT.
Penny Henare is in Singapore, and he's going to be talking about the Pacific there. There are other movements happening. There's Ardern is going to Australia on today for tomorrow, because they're not taking the plane, I don't think.
But have a chat.
Have a nice chat, have a nice meal. So there are things happening in the region, and then the big one, it will be in July, although the dates haven't yet been announced, and there's been the Pacific Islands Forum will be held in Suva, I think. Dates haven't been out. It's going to be a big deal. I think that New Zealand and Australia will both be wanting to make it very clear that they're present and committed and engaged in that forum. It's the first one in person for a while because of COVID. They just recently, in the last few days, have reached an accommodation because there was a lot of internal struggle with the Micronesian states saying that they were going to leave because of a leadership thing. Anyway, that's going to be a big deal coming up next month. Let's talk.
Can I just
finally,
say, it's
yes,
really interesting
yes.
when you think about the geopolitics of the Pacific, when you look at it through an Indigenous lens. And one of the things that I find interesting is when people say, oh, well, America is our what's the phrase, our natural partner, by comparison to China. And it's like, why? Because they're like a white colonial
I think people often think
country,
because they're democracy.
Because actually, I don't think that
because they
Indigenous Pacific Islanders, including us, would actually necessarily see it that way. And in terms of what our policy should be going forward, drawing from Māori concepts like mana motuhake, we do absolutely need to have our own independent policy that is about our own sovereignty, our food sovereignty, our economic sovereignty, and all of those things.
And I mean, you're referring to that piece again with the Tuvaluan foreign minister. He talks a little bit about some of those concepts, the kind of Pacific ideas of a kind of collective ownership, collective responsibility, and those sorts of things, which
and
may
look
not
at
be so.
How the Pacific's been used and abused by, places like the US and New Zealand and Australia. We made a documentary called Coast Watchers about, the Cook Islanders' contribution to World War II and just how we completely overlooked and ignored that later on. Like, we've got a lot of work to do.
Oh, on every level, on diplomatic levels, although, aid, we've been, trying to get into gear. Even Murray McCully got a lot of flack for redirecting our foreign aid budget to the Pacific directly away from, through
the big
UN
fat slushy.
organisations.
New Zealand Aid was basically a big fat slushy fund for failed consultants who came up with all sorts of harebrained schemes to roll out in the Pacific that were by and large unmitigated disasters.
No, that's right. We need more good CCP schemes to address climate change, like filling in atolls with just enough concrete to launch fighter jets off.
I think the time's come to talk about the Queen, just very briefly. I think it's important.
Queen.
Got it pretty 70 years. That's good. You can't fault that. 96 years old. We named. Did you see that New Zealand's contribution, which perhaps kind of reflects a level of commitment to would have been different on the. I don't know what we did. I don't know what we did with the 50th Jubilee, whatever that is, that cold, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But this time, what we did is we named a path on Stewart Island. We renamed a path on Stewart Island. For her, Queen Elizabeth II. She's already got lots of stuff, though.
Was she
got
pumped?
Parks and that pool in Christchurch. It's a good pool, good hydro slide.
You know what? If it had been like a horse track, she would have been like fizzing hard.
But
is there a horse lane on this trek?
I reckon you could take a horse there.
Yeah.
My concern is this. She's the good thing about her is she has this sort of dignity. She makes the British Prime Ministers feel a bit foolish in the way a lot of them, I don't know, they're weird, a lot of them. That's important. But
she's mana vibes, for sure.
Yeah, totally. She's got mummy vibes.
Mana vibes.
Mummy vibes. Mummy vibes. Charles called her mummy. In his thing, which is just weird.
Tina's having a meltdown. I think this is a generational thing. I don't
you know what? I was vibing with that.
We're up with the TikTok slang
when he called her mummy. I was so into that, and I was like, man, I hope my kids call me mama when they're like.
Well, good. I hope they do too. But
90s.
I don't want them to be the head of state. When they call, it's just the thing. Here's the thing, right? Like, at least she has this kind of gravitas and mummy mana. But hey, when she, God forbid that she might one day die, 96, Charles is not going to be able to stop himself from trying to, he'll be over here inspecting that path and saying, I want to regrow it with with tarragon or something. You know, he will not be able to stop himself from intervening in ways that, you know, the role only works when it is, the powers are never used, right?
Yeah, and look, John Key wrote a searching and penetrating article last year, I think, about what we could learn from our friends in North Korea. And
was that the one that was published in 7 different outlets?
7 different outlets, including exclusive to the Spin-Off plus 6 other outlets, was it? Did you guys publish?
No. We just ranked the different versions.
But the head of state in North Korea is Kim Il-sung, who is now about 110 years old. He's dead. He's dead. But he's still a great head of state. He does all the things that he's got dignity and gravitas. He never interferes. He never uses his reserve powers.
I like it.
Because he's dead.
I like it.
But pictures of him everywhere, great affection amongst the populace. I've got a book of his quotes.
So you're saying Queen
inspirational figure.
Elizabeth should remain the head of state even when she's in the ground?
I think that was what the public wants. I don't think the public want her to relinquish the title. So, yeah.
I just can't be ruled by Camilla's husband because I'm Team Diana like full.
Yeah.
So I'm not down with that.
Okay. Can't be ready for another civil war.
All right. Well, I think again we've solved everything. Tina, have you got anything to add to
Did you take notes, Tina, to action? What our action points are after this podcast?
Yes, I did. Lots of notes.
Send them off to Andrew Campbell.
Many thanks, beloved listeners. Many thanks, Annabelle, Ben, Tina, Ti here, who's working from home and going to cobble this together, and you, beloved listeners.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.